Hello, Watem here, and welcome back to some more Umineko When the Seagulls Cry. Let us continue. With Shannon entering the entrance hall to a mansion with a tottering gate. A mixture of exultation and uncertainty gave her a feeling that she couldn't easily describe. It swelled up in her chest until it felt like she was about to burst. After stopping for a second in front of a servant room to take a deep breath and calm her heart, she opened the door. Inside, Gorda, who had been ordered to take the midnight shift of the mansion tonight, was absorbed in a worn-out crossword puzzle magazine. He looked up for an instant to see if one of her family had come, but when he realized it was a fellow servant, he returned to his puzzle as if nothing had happened.
源氏様より郷田さんのお手伝いにつくように言われてまいりました。
ああ、そうですか。それは助かります。そろそろ戸締まりの見回りに行きたかったのですが、ここを開けてもいいものか困っていたのです。何しろ、旦那様方の会合はまだだいぶ続きそうですからね。いつ何時、お茶のご用命があるかもわかりませんし。
そうですよね。では、どうしましょうか。私が留守番。
ではシャノンさん、申し訳ありませんが、お屋敷内の見回りをお願いします。
So that he can stay there doing the puzzle.
私はここで親族の皆さんのご用命の待機をしておりますので。
はい。
Shannon was slightly disgusted. Even though she'd come here to help out as a favor, she was casually being forced to do the job of a person actually on duty. Furthermore, after one-sidedly forcing that task on her, Gorda returned to his magazine once again and became immersed in his crossword puzzle. Shannon bowed her head as a token sign of respect for her elder, then left the room to patrol the mansion. Thanks to her being a bit ticked off, she managed to suppress that floaty feeling she'd been having until just now. And anyway, she couldn't let Genji or Cannons see her looking like this. She wanted a little more time to herself until her heart calmed down. So maybe going on patrol wouldn't be so bad. She began to hear the tumultuous voices of family discussion coming from the dining room hall. Someone was speaking at great length, only to be interrupted by someone else. The second person also began to speak in a very long, drawn-out fashion, until yet another person interrupted. That kept on repeating. It was as though their displeasure was seeping out through their voices. She had been told to go to the guest house, so it would be bad if Kraus discovered her. Thinking this, Shannon dashed past the dining hall. Then, she went along a prearranged route through the dark mansion, checking that all the locks were secure. She walked down the hall, checking each window. There were no humans on Rokkenjima other than those connected to the family, so locking up didn't really serve much of a purpose. No one had been in the habit of locking up the Shiromiya head family, at least not until Natsuhi had scolded them for being careless. Metal fixtures on windows were ice cold, and as she checked them one by one, the glow in her heart seemed to cool down. One of the windows is going to be unlocked, isn't it? Ooh. Oh? At that time, she thought she saw something twinkling across the hall. Twinkling? How could anything be twinkling through the darkness of the hall? She figured she must have been imagining it, but she still held her breath. Grasping a curtain, she fearfully gazed down the hall. However, other than the occasional crack of thunder brightening the hallway, she was unable to glimpse any flicker again. It must have been her imagination after all. It won't be her imagination. Maybe her heart was so agitated that she'd seen something that didn't even exist. Shannon went back to checking the windows. However, a certain unnerving memory was resurrected in the back of her mind. Resurrected? It was that ghost story, which had been passed down amongst the servants who served the Shiromiya head family. The mansion had two different masters, one of the day and one of the night. Beatrice, the master of the night, would sometimes fly around the mansion in the form of sparkling butterflies. That was the story. Come to think of it, didn't Canon-kun once say he'd seen it with his own eyes? So he got sulky when I said he must have imagined it and refused to believe them. Could it possibly be true? The roar of the thunder gave no answer. Back to George, I'm guessing, as he goes back to the guest house. No? Beatrice, maybe? I mean, Beatrice painting, but that's not exactly what I meant. Oh, the bell tolls. The shouting voices which Shannon heard. Okay, what is going on here? All the people in Konjima at the moment, I guess? For some reason or another. Not even Kinzo getting any dialogue or anything. And back to Beatrice. And that's an achievement. 24 hours. And shatter? No shatter at all. Huh. Past midnight. Or what's that? 6 AM. I wasn't actually paying much attention. I guess 6 AM. Second day, October 5th, 1986. Higurashi was 1983, right? Genji tightened his bow tie and looked outside through a crack in the curtains. Maybe the rain had died down a tiny bit since the previous night. But the thick rain clouds didn't seem like they'd be letting any trace of the morning sun get by. The morning was dim and far from refreshing. Who was this again? Genji.
やはり今日いっぱいはやみそうにないか。
お待たせしました、源氏様。
Cannon finished checking his appearance and exited the washroom. On their normal schedule, it was rare for anyone to have to suffer going straight from a midnight shift to an early morning shift. They were on a special schedule for the 2 days of a family conference. However, unless the typhoon passed today, the relatives' stay on this island would last until tomorrow. Cannon thought it was best to be prepared for a special schedule to last an extra day. Yeah, that's right. The two of them left the guest house, opening their umbrellas. The rose garden had been devastated by the wind and the rain on the previous night. Even though they'd spent several days making it beautiful to welcome the guests, one stormy night was enough to ruin it. Cannon sighed. The two headed for the mansion. They were supposed to meet up with Goda and prepare breakfast. Goda was such a perfectionist that he'd probably already woken up, and was probably already preparing a breakfast as exquisite and elegant as glasswork. like sugar glass maybe. They reached the overhang by the entrance to the mansion and folded up their umbrellas. Genji took a bundle of several keys from his pocket and unlocked the front door. The Ushiro family mansion was the only thing on Rokkanjima, so in the past, they hadn't been in the habit of locking up. However, Natsuhi had ordered that the mansion be locked up from midnight to early morning. Now, going on a limb here, the last thing we heard from Shannon was her seeing the butterflies, and we're expecting possibly up to 6 people to die tonight, or maybe today. Is perhaps the front door not locked because Shannon wasn't able to finish locking up? Nope. Okay. Ever since then, unlocking the door in the early morning had become part of a servant's morning shift. His task had been given to Genji and Cannon, so that Gorda could start preparing breakfast as soon as he woke up. Silence had fallen over the mansion, giving the impression that the mansion itself was still asleep.
では朝の仕事を始めよう。
はい。
The two of them split up and began opening the curtains throughout the mansion. If the curtains stayed closed, the mansion would remain enveloped in faint darkness, as though it was still trapped in the previous night. Following a well-rehearsed procedure, Cannon went around the mansion, opening the curtains for one window after another without having to retrace his steps once. Even with this horrible weather, drawing the curtains made it feel just a little bit like morning. While doing that, he passed in front of the kitchen. Even though he hadn't smelled anything yet, his stomach started aching for some of Golda's prized cooking.
おはようございます。
He's not there. He tried to greet Golda. We should have been getting breakfast ready, but Golda was nowhere to be seen. The kitchen was darkly lit, and not only were the curtains not open, but the fan wasn't even running. It was still cold, without any trace of a fire being lit, so of course there were no signs of breakfast being made either. They would have been inexcusable. Perhaps Golda had overslept. Even servants are only human. Yeah, remember that next time you call yourself furniture. They sometimes sleep in and show up late. In the rare case that such a thing happens, it's part of a servant's code to hide the unsightly scene before anyone notices, smoothly cover it up, and make sure the family never even realizes that anything had gone wrong. Cannon took the receiver of a phone that had been fitted to the wall and dialed the number for the extension line in the servant's sleeping room. No response. He couldn't hear that characteristic sound of a dial tone. Phones had been cut. Cannon tried picking up the receiver again, but even so he couldn't hear the usual dial tone. He tried dialing again, but it had no apparent effect. Maybe the line's in use. Could the lightning last night have damaged some machine, breaking the extension line? The equipment in this mansion was all worn out. Cannon fully understood that even the smallest thing could have caused it to break down. He gave up trying to wake Golda with the phone and dashed over to the servant's sleeping room. Now, who is this? How long has it been since I stopped sleeping and started lazily staring up at the ceiling? That vague sense of awakening was part of Natsuhi's usual morning routine. She always slept lightly, and she couldn't sleep at all without medicine. To Natsuhi, sleep was definitely not a happy thing. When she looked outside, she saw that it was still pouring. If she hadn't sensed a tiny amount of light, she might have mistakenly thought it was still the previous night. She herself was one of the hosts, so she mustn't wake up later than her guests. Urging herself on, she raised up her body, which still hadn't completely recovered from yesterday's weariness. That's a nice room. No one would torment her as long as she remained inside this room. And her headache wouldn't get any worse. Here. This room was the only place she could find peace. So when she left it meant returning to the world where her husband's siblings kept trying to stab each other in the back. In that case, Wouldn't it be better to just stay locked up in this room forever? That ridiculous notion brought a bitter smile to Natsuhi's face. She was starting to sound like Kinzo. Though she often complained about Kinzo staying locked up in his own room and refusing to attend to everyone else, the truth was she longed to do the same. Natsuhi gave her head a small shake, and her fantasy was replaced by the reawakening of her usual headache. Perhaps the reason why she complains so often about him staying locked up is because she wants to be able to do that, but knows that she can't. When she reached for the doorknob, trying to leave the room, her hand touched the scorpion charm that she had hung from it before going to sleep the previous night. Wait, so if Jessica gave her mum the charm, perhaps Jessica's in danger. It was Maria's charm, which Natsuhi had received from Jessica. Didn't Jessica say something about it having the power to repel magic, telling her to hang it from her doorknob? Maybe it was thanks to the charm that at least the stream had been protected from the malice of her husband's siblings. As she thought this, Miu began to get a little more cheerful.
ジェシカのおかげで少しはゆっくり眠れたということかしら。
Then Natsuhi remembered. That's right. Last night I promised Jessica that I'd give her a charm of my own in exchange for this one, didn't I? Natsuhi opened a drawer on her dresser and took out an antique accessory case that she had treasured when she was a child. Inside, there were many small objects that Natsuhi had thought were valuable at the time. From mid-space, she pulled out a red pouch. Inside was a small round mirror, about 10 centimeters across. It looked quite old, but the design on the back of the mirror was very ornate, and it felt like something with historical value. At the very least, it seemed much more authentic than the other charm, which looked like a plastic scorpion keychain. She had heard that this was a spiritual mirror for warding off evil spirits. She'd been given it especially by her grandmother when her grandfather's mementos had been distributed. It had been believed since long ago that a strange power resided in this mirror. Perhaps people thought it could reflect calamity and malice in the same way it reflected light. Natsuhi returned the mirror to its pouch. It would probably be a fitting object to hand over to Jessica. Just as she was placing it in her pocket, the sound of someone knocking on the door suddenly echoed throughout the room.
はい。
おはようございます、奥様。源氏でございます。早朝から申し訳ございません。
今行きます。何事ですか?
No servant had ever come to her this early in the morning, nor had they come to wake her in person. Perhaps something bad had happened. Maybe some fatal oversight had been made while preparing breakfast. Something that would shame the household in front of their guests. Natsuhi took a deep breath in anticipation for whatever troubles she was about to hear of. It's going to be much worse than anything she's imagining. When she opened the door, Genji once again gave a morning greeting while bowing deeply. Natsuhi tentatively responded.
おはようございます。何かありましたか?
申し訳ございません。昨夜の落雷で電話機器に故障が出たようです。
Just for telephones?
内線電話が普通になっておりますもので、直接のお伺いになってしまったことをお許しください。
However, still a message to give to you directly.
内線電話が普通? それは面倒になりましたね。修理は可能ですか?
残念ながら故障箇所がわかりません。後で業者を呼んで修理させたいと思います。
ということは、この台風が過ぎるまでは修理不能ということですか。つまり、客人たちの滞在中はずっと普通ということですね。
Unfortunate, but nothing you can really do about it.
客人たちのお世話に支障は?
出ないよう最善を尽くします。
結構です。粗相のないようよろしく頼みます。
Natsuhi let out a small sigh of relief. She had been prepared for the worst, but damage to the telephones wasn't the kind of trouble she was worried about. Then again, even this would probably be enough to spark sarcasm from Eva. But the fact that he was trying to reach you, the way which he said it, definitely insinuated that he was trying to reach her through the telephone for something else. However, because the extension telephone isn't working, he's coming directly. Natsui gave her head a light shake.
朝食の準備は順調ですか？
それがゴーダの姿が見えません。朝食の支度もまだ行われておらず。
なんですって？
Natsui was indignant. To her, this was a much bigger problem than the phone's not working. Despite that, this piece of information was the part that had been postponed. Why did everything go well most of the time and then not come to something like this when relatives were visiting? Well, yeah, I mean, the only reason he was talking about the phones is because that was the reason why he hadn't been able to just phone her this information. Natsui put her hand to her forehead and shook her head.
大方朝寝坊でもしているのでしょう。
Except that's the issue. We can't find him there.
とにかく誰でもいいから急いで朝食の準備を。
Natsui exited into the hall and turned around for a second to close the door to her room. The creepy thing she saw there silenced her completely. It was an unpleasant sight, as though someone had dipped their fingers in a reddish-black liquid and scratched at the door around the doorknob. It's probably some sort of awful prank, arranged by some person who wanted to make it look as though they'd tried to force the door with bloody hands. Did the scorpion keychain protect her?
これは悪趣味な。
私も今ここにお伺いして初めて気づきました。後ほど清掃いたします。
大方、趣味の悪い客人の冗談でしょう。不愉快です。実に不愉快です。
Alternatively, someone was trying to get help while on the verge of death, and we were unable to open the door or something. Who in the world would pull such a childish and disgusting prank? Natsui had a pretty good idea, but of course there was no proof. So even if she pushed the issue, it would just seem as though she was making a fuss about nothing. In fact, it would surely be better to act as though she hadn't even realized that such a prank had been played on her. Natsui gave the order to have it cleaned and headed off to the parlour with a squeak of her heels. When Natsui and Genji arrived at the parlour, Eva and Hideyoshi were already there. Okay, so they're both still alive.
おはようございます、皆さん。
おはよう、夏日さん。朝食も合田さんが作るっちゅう話やないか。
Okay, wait. So 6 for the first night. So I'm going to guess Shannon. I don't know for certain, but almost definitely Goda. But yeah, these two are the two servants there. Maybe Shannon returned to the guest house, but it definitely doesn't sound like she did. So 1, 2, and then 6 of these, and then 4 of these rather. I'm gonna guess Nanjo. I feel like I mentioned this previous time, but he definitely seems like one of the first people to die. So then 3 left out of the family, which does not include these 3. So 1, 2.
朝から胃袋が大喜びで騒ぎっぱなしなんや。
本家の楽しみは食事くらいがせいぜいですものね。
And then now Natsuhi's going to think that somehow they're behind Goda not showing up to make breakfast. And that they're provoking her.
エヴァさんも 朝からご機嫌がよろしいようで何よりです。
With a weary expression, Natsuhi returned Eva's gaze, which was fiercely competitive despite the early hour. Then Cannon jogged in. After bowing an apology to the relatives for running inside the mansion, he noticed Genji and told him something in a small voice.
カノン、ゴーダはまだ見つからないのですか？
申し訳ございません、奥様。
He has found her, but...
お屋敷内もゲストハウスも回ったのですが、まだ。
Never mind then.
一体どこへ行ったというのです。とりあえず今はゴーダより朝食の準備が先決です。至急対応しなさい。
はい。
Cannon glanced at Genji. It seemed he had something else to report, but was uncertain whether or not the words should come from him. Genji nodded and decided to give the report himself.
奥様、ゴーダだけではありません。
Shannon?
旦那様の姿もありません。
Okay. So Kraus is gone. Perhaps Rudolph as well?
主人が？
はい。奥様より先に旦那様に朝食の準備がないことをご報告しようと思い、それから旦那様だけではありません。
Okay, so let me guess at least two of the other that's missing. Nanjo and Shannon.
ルドルフ様ご夫妻とロ
Oh,
ーザ様のお姿もありません。
both of them. Huh.
ゲストハウスにも？屋敷にもですか？
はい。ゲストハウスの部屋にもおられません。
When she'd heard that Goda alone was missing, she'd assumed he'd slept in or was loafing around somewhere. However, now that she'd learned that several of the relatives were also nowhere to be seen, she began to take a slightly more optimistic view. Could last night's family conference have continued all night up until the present moment? If so, they might have wanted to cool their heads after being shut in a stuffy room, going out for walks on their own through the rain. The part about cooling their heads really sounded like something Kraus would say. Goda had probably been summoned to accompany them and aid them in some way. Goda was not a man who lost track of time. He had to understand that preparations for breakfast would be hindered if he did not return. However, maybe the family conference had continued until this very moment, with an atmosphere that would make it hard for anyone to slip up. Yes, that theory would be quite convincing for Natsuhi. She remembered the illusion she felt that morning, as though the previous night had never ended. When she learned that the feeling wasn't just an illusion, she once again took a deep, weary breath. After all, that banquet of filthy vultures circling Kinzo's property was still going on.
大方、庭園のどこか、あるいは海岸の方で相も変わらず遺産の話を繰り返しているのでしょう。とにかくゴーダを呼び戻さなくてはいつまでも朝食の準備が整いません。
ってことはなんや、兄さんたちの話し合いはまだ続いとるんか。
She planned to say it in a small voice, but Hideyoshi overheard Natsui and managed to grasp the situation.
兄さんもルドルフもタフね。ローザの場合は若さかしら。私たち夕べの24時過ぎにはもう眠くてベッドに戻らせてもらったんだけど、確かにあの時点でもまだ兄さんたちは熱論を交わしてたわ。男って熱くなると嫌ね。
Natsuhi snorted, her face still blank.
カノン、表を探してらっしゃい。ゴーダを見つけたらすぐに戻って朝食の準備をするよう伝えなさい。
かしこまりました。
夏日姉さん、表とは限らないわよ。
Well, if you're not inside, then they're outside.
お父様の書斎ってことはないかしら。
Okay, fine.
なるほど、考えられん話やないで。どういう話の流れかはわからんが、お父さんの主催に場所を移してお父さんにも混じってもらって議論を続けてるっちゅう可能性は十分あるやろ。
I highly doubt that, though.
そのような汚らわしい話題を好んでお父様が書斎へ招き入れることなど考えられません。
あらそう。じゃあ仕方ないわね。源氏さんとカノン君は申し訳ないけど外を探してきてちょうだい。確かに兄さんなら頭を冷やすために外を散歩しようなんて言い出しても不思議はないわ。たとえこんな天気でもね。
Yes, well, rain is especially good for cooling your head.
私はお父様の書斎に行ってくるわ。ひょっとするとそこにいるかもしれないしね。
客人であるエヴァさんにそこまでのご足労はおかけできません。私が行ってきます。朝のご挨拶も兼ねて。
あら、じゃあお願いするわね。でも朝の挨拶を交わしてくれるかは疑わしいわね。夏日姉さんってお父様とは仲よろしかったかしら？
Well, if the others are there, then it doesn't matter if she's on good terms with father, because she's on good terms. Well, she's on terms with the others at least.
仲が良いかは分かりかねますが、後宮家の跡継ぎの妻を許されるだけの信頼を得ていると確信しています。
Doubt.
ならきっと返事くらいはしてくれるわね。お父様とは朝食くらいご一緒したいの。
No, you don't.
ぜひ降りてきてくださるよう説得してくれないかしら？私たちはすっかり嫌われちゃってるみたいだけど、そこまで信頼を得ている夏日姉さんの言うことなら聞いてくれそうですもの。そこまで短歌を切ってお父様を説得できず一人で降りてきちゃったりしたら、信頼を得ているなんて二度と言えないかもね。
Not really. I mean, it's a bit of a jump in logic there.
自信はありませんが、努力はします。
Natsuki responded, looking discouraged. However, knowing Kinzo's temperament, she had absolutely no confidence in her ability to bring him out. Eva was clearly mocking her, confident that Natsuki wouldn't be able to get Kinzo to calm down. But even so, Natsuki would lose face if she gave up, saying it was impossible, and letting Eva go instead. Eva's mean-spirited and unreasonable demand made Natsuki clench her fist slightly. When Genji realized this, he softly spoke to her over her shoulder.
奥様、よろしければこれをお持ちください。
Oh?
それは？
Genji handed Natsuki a sparkling gold key of ornate design. It was a key to Kinzo's study. The study had an auto lock and couldn't be unlocked as long as Kinzo forbade entrance. However, since Genji was especially trusted by Kinzo, he was allowed to carry a key to that door.
でもこの鍵を使ったら、あなたも咎めを受けるのではありませんか？
親方様は深くお休みになられている時、扉を叩くくらいで、それに親方様にお部屋を出ていただくよう説得するには、扉越しでは難しゅうございましょう。
In any case, I'll be ending it here for today. I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know any feedback you have in the comments. Until next time, see ya. We'll find out who else is missing.